It's identify, attract, engage the best candidates, people who can come into an org. They can listen first. They can make an impact that the organization as a whole can feel, and so that their customers can feel. And I'm a big fan of internal and external NPS surveys. And I think we're going to start to see that more popular as time goes on. So employees and customers want to work with people they like, in addition, who can perform at a high level.
Welcome to Offer Accepted, the podcast that elevates your recruiting game. Your host, Shannon Ogborn, interviews top talent acquisition leaders, uncovering their secrets to building and leading successful recruiting teams. Gain valuable insights and actionable advice, from analyzing cutting-edge metrics to claiming your seat at the table. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Offer Accepted. I'm Shannon Ogborn, your host, and this episode is brought to you by Ashby, the all-in-one recruiting platform empowering ambitious teams from seed to IPO and beyond. I'm here today with Natan Fisher, co-founder and co-CEO of SingleSprout, a tech-enabled search firm that specializes in hiring knowledge workers for high-growth tech companies across the U.S. Natan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Shannon and Ashby. It's my pleasure.
We're so happy you're here. Let's give the audience a little bit of background on yourself. Can you tell us a little bit about SingleSprout and what your role is there?
Yeah. Again, so I'm Natan. I'm co-founder, co-CEO at SingleSprout, a tech-enabled search firm that specializes in hiring software engineers, data scientists, product managers, and attorneys for high-growth tech companies and law firms across the U.S. David Sott is the other co-founder. We've been friends actually since we were 7 years old, so more than 30 years. We've started SingleSprout about 10 years ago, just with the idea of innovating the approach to recruiting. And since then, we've helped hundreds of the fastest growing companies hire thousands of candidates. And probably one of our biggest differentiators outside of our amazing team is our proprietary technology built by in-house engineers. So we're automatically sourcing and matching candidates, allowing our recruiters to focus on building high quality relationships.
What does it mean to be a co-CEO? How did you come to that?
Yeah. So I'd like to think that we've been co-CEOs since we were little kids because we grew up together. We always had an entrepreneurial drive. We were actually selling t-shirts when we were 17 years old. And we wanted to start a business together. And yeah, so we're 50-50 partners. We never took any investment. But I actually focus a lot more on the external side of the business, and he focuses more on the internal side of the business. And it's really nice. We complement each other there.
That's great. I feel like that's best business case scenario where your skills are complementary.
That's always what you want, right? Where you put your energy into the places that you're the best at.
Totally. So obviously you all work with a lot of companies. When companies come to you, what are some of the challenges that they come with? What are some of the major challenges that you've seen across the years in your business?
Yeah. So I'd say that the biggest challenge usually in approaching any recruiting company is the top of the funnel. Companies come to us because they are looking for the best talent out there. And the best talent almost always has the most options, and they're the hardest to attract. We obviously help them as well on the interview process and closing. But I'd say like the number one reason that companies reach out to us and their problem is let's get more qualified and interested candidates in the door.
For sure. And in your experience, what do you think are some of the main contributors to those top of funnel challenges?
Yeah. Wow. I could write a book on this, but it's a combination of things. I mean, like anything else in business, there's competition. If I had to break it down, I probably would say 3 key points. So one is limited brand awareness. Your average candidate that's really high quality is going to have 10 to 20 outreaches a day. They're getting reached out to all the time. So limited brand awareness, constrained resources, and just as important, if not more important than those two, are targeting the correct profile. And so all of those combined make it extremely tough, especially for top-notch software engineers, which is our bread and butter. They're getting reached out to all the time. They hear of, a startup doing X, and there might be 5 in their category that are doing the same.
Totally. Yeah, when I was at Google, I could pretty easily cold call anyone and be like, "Hi, it's Shannon from Google." And they're like, "From where?" I'm like, "From Google." And they're like, "Oh, Google." And I did get told to F off a couple of times, but other than that, the experience was generally very positive because obviously Google has very strong brand awareness and is a company that people historically have highly sought working for. But when you're cold calling or you're reaching out to somebody from a startup, especially like let's say stealth mode startup or a smaller company, it's like, from who? I've never heard of you. What do you do? And sometimes you can't even get past that point because the candidate's like, or the potential candidate's like, I don't know you. Don't call me. Don't
Right.
email me. Don't text me. Whatever. So brand awareness is definitely quite the challenge, especially with companies that are newer or lesser known. And in tech there's always newer companies because it's fast moving industry.
Yeah. I would say for companies that have, that aren't stealth, that are later stage, just because they've also heard about you doesn't mean that they have any interest or any excitement towards interviewing with you.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that makes a big difference. And I'm excited to kind of get into that with you of like, how do we get someone interested and, how do we make sure someone's qualified?
Absolutely. So in terms of creating change around this top of funnel challenge, how do you begin to create change, or how do you communicate with companies around creating this change?
Yeah. So I think it all starts with the intake process with the hiring manager and anyone else involved. And obviously a hot topic, but now with AI, generative AI, it can be really easy to plug in some data points and make a generic job description. But I think the human collaboration piece here is so important. It's an interview process in its own right. So you're interviewing, if I am the point of contact, whether I'm an external recruiter or internal recruiter, we always believe you want to interview the hiring manager, any other stakeholders, and gather as much data as possible. As one of your earlier episodes mentioned, the person was talking about the difference between a service provider and a trusted advisor. And we obviously want to sit as a trusted advisor, someone that will challenge, someone that will be a thought leader, someone that will guide, someone that will help based on previous experience and is not just sitting there, finding what the person wants. So, moreover, you're going to want to reach out to the hiring manager, schedule 30 to 60 minutes with them. The reason being, you want to have a deep understanding of the job needs so that you can share that information with candidates accurately. You'll also want to share with the hiring manager that you have key insights into the industry, key insights into market conditions, the talent landscape that's going to be useful in the conversation. Now, the hiring manager may push back and say, just give me what I want. And you're going to basically come back to them and say, by spending this time up front, we're going to save hours, maybe days, maybe weeks, maybe months, and headache down the line instead of going back and forth. And I'd also add that candidates are going to have a lot of questions that you're going to take off of the hiring manager's plate and off of whatever else, whoever else is in the interview process. So I can't stress this enough. I say all this because candidate experience is going to be a lot better when you're gathering this data up front. You're putting together a really straightforward and transparent job description, a straight, transparent outreach messages and pitch. And you should assume that with all of these marketing approaches, candidates are going to talk to their friends, they're going to talk to colleagues, peers, family about their experience, about your marketing, and it's going to reflect on your company as a whole. Net, your process will go much faster because of higher quality, because of this conversation. Does that make sense?
Definitely. So in business, there is a concept known as ICP, which is ideal customer profile. You all have kind of adapted that into an ICP for your recruiting process, which in this case stands for ideal candidate profile. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so that's a great point, Shannon. We use this concept of ICP, and I think it's incredibly relevant for right now, especially because go-to-market revenue, ideal customer profile is talked about a lot. We see this on social media, and any strong sales leader will talk about ideal customer profile. At SingleSprout, we think about it as ideal candidate profile. And I do want to note that that's ideal. It's not
Yeah,
perfect, right? So we're striving for the ideal profile, which means that we're going to have iteration. And we understand this really well at SingleSprout, like 60 to 70% acceptance rate of candidates that we send to companies they want to speak with. And we have to, right? Most of the time we're working for free, right? So if we're not sending them qualified and interested candidates, that's it for us.
totally. Yeah, I find it in my conversations with people, what I found to be an interesting trend across the board is that a lot of recruiting teams that are seeing success in specific programs or specific areas of their recruiting process, it's because they're taking concepts that exist otherwise in business and applying them to recruiting. Because as I've talked with many people about, recruiting is a business unit. Recruiting is part of the business just like any other part of the business: sales, marketing, product engineering. And so really being able to take what has worked for other functions and implement that into the recruiting function has seemed to be a trend that I've seen work really well for companies.
100%. I couldn't agree with that more, and actually have more to share of, how we're relating to the end user here. But I mean, recruiting is, I was just speaking to an investor earlier this week, and she's amazing. And she was saying the number one difference from one company to the next is how they recruit, how they hire, and how they onboard, right?
Hmm.
Because often we have, multiple winners in the same category, or quote unquote, multiple winners. And the difference is the people, right? So why not, really focus on this, really focus on the numbers, the strategy, be very thoughtful, continue to iterate, continue to measure, right? So I totally
Totally.
agree.
For sure. So when it comes to the ICP and creating the ICP, so this is like a common thing, marketing will go to sales or vice versa, and they'll say, okay, what questions do I need to ask to create this ICP? What information do we need to collect from the business to really understand what the ICP is? What questions do you ask hiring managers to create this ICP?
Yeah, great, great ask. I think before we even get into the questions, when you're having that conversation, it's really important to start off with setting expectations. And so what I like to say to our clients that we are onboarding and we're talking to the hiring manager, maybe, hiring manager plus their team, it's our job to deliver qualified and interested candidates to you. And it's both of our jobs to get them through the process, if possible, right? The candidate is a
Mm-hmm.
human being too. They can do what they want. I say that because in this conversation, I want to dig deep and really understand what qualified means and how we get candidates as interested as possible. And I may challenge you, and that's because the best candidates ask us a lot of questions and they really do their diligence. So is that okay if I also challenge you at points here?
Right. Absolutely. So, yeah, I think that's such a good point. And it's not, unfortunately, there's just a lot of ego in business. And so I think clarifying that point helps set a little bit of a, this isn't about you, right? As a human being. This isn't like I'm challenging you and your personal philosophy. It's me trying to extract information so that we can both have the best case scenario outcome, which is you hire someone that matches the role well and that you're really excited about.
Totally, totally. And you should expect great candidates to challenge everyone in the process and make sure this is a good fit. This company is stable. The role does make sense for their customers, right? And so I like to preempt that. And so, yeah.
Yeah, it's always interesting working with a candidate where they ask a super hard question. You're like, oh damn, that is a good question. Let's let's get you an answer on that. If you don't have it, as a recruiter, you don't have it yourself. Maybe it's better coming from the hiring manager or someone on the team. But But yeah, people, especially right now, are asking a lot of questions because they want to confirm that wherever they move next, they're not going to be in a similar situation where they are laid off or whatever. So it's really important to be prepared for that pushback. So what is really like the first question then that you need to get the information from the hiring manager?
Yeah, I think it starts with one, is this hire really necessary? And why is it the right time now? Like really hearing from their opinion that they've done diligence, that this isn't going to be a role, as you said, in the market conditions that is going to be cut in a few months. Right. And so
Mhm.
having that ammo necessary, I think, is a great start. I would then move pretty quickly to, what is the candidate solving for in terms of, if possible, the customer problems? So what's mission critical for the organization and your customers as it comes to this specific position? And it's an important reminder that candidates want meaning, they want purpose, they want impact in their job. So how their work impacts the end user is critical. And this might be also another opportunity to ask the hiring manager to clarify what problem the organization is tackling, in their opinion, and what the company is doing to solve for that. So in other words, what makes this role and this company so special to the candidate? I'll pause there. Any questions or thoughts?
Yeah, one thought that comes to mind too, just in terms of pitching candidates, or maybe selling is not the right word, but just giving them a proper vision of the role, is that when you can tie what the candidate will be doing directly to a customer need or a need of the business, I do think that makes candidates feel more confident that they know the role is necessary, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, going back to, the candidate's reality, which is tough because we want to put ourselves in their shoes. We want to give them enough value for them to go back to their potential spouse, their family, their friends, their colleagues, and sell them on why they want to work there,
Mhm.
right? Why it's important for them to work there, why it makes a lot of sense, this role. Because again, their network is going to be asking likely the same questions that they're asking us. Does that make sense?
Totally, and like me, I have multiple children. So if I'm moving roles, when I was considering leaving Google and switching roles, I'm like, I just like had to ask so many questions about stability because I really needed to know. And again, sometimes the market just it happens and we aren't prepared for the outcome of like the mass layoffs that we've seen in the last like 6 to 9 months. But at the same time, you can validate a little bit more stability if you're asking the right questions and doing the right things. So you can go back to your family and be like, hey, I feel like I'm making a really informed choice. And if it doesn't work out, then sometimes that's just life. But at least you know that you did your due diligence to ask the right questions, to make these validations so that you feel confident and informed in your decision and not just kind of like, seems okay, right?
Right. And sometimes you don't have a choice, but I think that's like business 101, is the more that the buyer understands what you're selling, the
hmm
more likely they are to buy.
Right. For sure. For sure. So, would you
Yeah.
say that you can extract all of this information in a single session with the stakeholders or with a stakeholder, or does it take more than one session to get this information out?
Yeah, good question. I think it depends. I mean, we shoot for about an hour and see what we can tackle. And we have some questions that we ask them to fill out before. But I think it's really important to also get anyone else who's a key stakeholder. So let's say you're hiring for an individual level, individual contributor software engineer, and their manager is the hiring manager. But the VP of Eng, the CTO, they're also part of the process. They also have a good understanding of what, the team, the function, the org is supposed to be doing. We want to understand as much as possible from different standpoints. And I can't tell you how many times we have different conversations and we get different answers to the same
Mhm.
question about just the organization. And it's super interesting. It's just like, another viewpoint. Ideally, it's the same, but it's another viewpoint to kind of challenge and say, well, I heard X here and I heard Y there. Which one is it? And maybe it's somewhere in the middle. It's also to understand maybe that person doesn't have customer challenges, feedback, complaints, solutions, roadmap. We want to be rigorously testing everything based on these conversations, based on the information they provide, as well as when you start getting candidates into the process and interviewing them, you want to be adjusting the data set.
Right. It also makes total sense for you all to try to align everybody because not everybody seems to be able to align themselves. So if you have the most information to say, hey, I heard this from you, I heard this from you, let's get together and talk about this because these are two completely different things that we would be looking for. We want to make sure we're fully aligned, like top to bottom on why we're hiring this person, what need they're fulfilling, and things like that.
100%. We want to be rowing the boat in the same direction. If not, we're going to have problems later on.
100%. So what are some additional questions that you ask hiring managers or stakeholders to get the information you need to create this ICP?
Yeah, this is one of my favorites as a follow-up. So what is this job not? And what does failure look like in this role? And how does that impact potentially the end user here? And I stole this from Chris Gannon at Captivate Talent, and I love the idea. We should know what the job isn't and why that's important for our customers. I would actually say even before what we're defining as success. Have you heard that before?
No, but I think it's an interesting premise because it again gives people a lot of transparency and insight into what they're actually going to be doing on a day-to-day basis and what they're not going to be doing and what's required so they can decide if it's a good match for them.
Totally. I mean, we'll get candidates that want to work cross-functionally and the job description, doesn't say, maybe it says some collaboration. Let's say the job for all intents and purposes is not cross-functional. Like this person has a project to do, they need to get it done. Maybe they work with another engineer, for example. It would be really nice to know upfront who you're going to work with and who you're potentially not going to work with. And I know that could come off as negative, but to be honest, I would rather go a little bit negative, not overly negative, but a little bit negative just to show this is what the job isn't. And if you want to clarify that, we can have a conversation, but at least, there's some non-starters for candidates out there that you're just wasting your time, and you potentially want them to self-select out on.
Yeah, I had an interview. I sat down recently with Adam Horn, who is the co-founder of OpenOrg. It's all about organizations being transparent. And one of the things he continuously encourages is the idea of on a job description, putting something like, this is why you wouldn't want this job. Like, why wouldn't you want this job? Because, yeah, it could be like, if you're really interested in cross collaboration, this job is pretty solo, pretty siloed. It's just the way the role is. It could change over time, but that's where we're at today. And so then candidates can opt in or opt out if that's a deal breaker for them. So I think it's interesting to get that information because that helps you pitch it to candidates. And not to say like you're anti-pitching, but having the information and making an informed choice is a big part of our success as recruiters and as a big part of the person's success once they get into the organization as well.
Totally. I think the number one reason that, there's turnover, whether it's someone getting laid off, someone being let go, or someone quitting on their own is mismanaged expectations, right? It's definitely
Absolutely.
up there if it's not number one. I think, to that point also, if you can talk about what success looks like, KPIs, goals, why, how does that impact the end user again? That's a nice complement to the first question of like, what is this job not? What does failure look like? And so those two together really paint a really nice picture of what the job should be. Of course, there's flexibility and we need to understand the market, but I think both are important.
For sure. Anything else to add here around like really important additional questions to ask?
Totally. So I think this one is probably the most important, but what are the absolute non-negotiable must-haves of this profile of this role? So we're looking at things like compensation budget, skills, achievements, tenure, location, industry, performance expectations, soft skills, culture fit, and a good follow-up because, a lot of times hiring managers want to put a list of 20 different non-negotiables on there. It's the same thing kind of with data where it's like, you know, I'm amazing. And so we need amazing people here.
Mhm.
But it's then our job as the hiring POC. How do you rank these, right? And where is their flexibility? Like, again, going back to the AI point, we have so much data out there. We're at the frontier, the next frontier of data. It's overwhelming at times. And remind them, we're looking for ideal. We're not looking for perfect. Perfect doesn't exist. So we need to know where there's flexibility. And
Right.
my general thought process on this is no more than four. Four non-negotiable must-haves. Pick your top four, and then all of the rest we're going to nice-to-haves.
Definitely. It's kind of like dating, like we were just talking about. It's like you can't expect a person to have all 20 attributes that would be ideal, but there are some things that are just non-negotiable where you're like, this person, my partner, has to have this. This candidate needs to be at our San Francisco location. So either they need to be in San Francisco already or they need to be willing to relocate. Like, those are the important things so that you're not wasting your time. Or I think, honestly, a lot of times, most importantly, the candidate's time, because they're busy. They're looking elsewhere. You're trying to help them, and you want to have a good reputation amongst candidates for whether you're an external recruiter or an internal recruiter, the business that you're presenting to them and the company you're presenting to them. So definitely, yes, we get lots of running lists on what people should have to be a perfect candidate, but like you said, perfect doesn't exist.
Yeah. And this is where the challenge part, I think, comes into what we discussed earlier, because the hiring manager might come back and say, like, what are we paying you for? Right? Why are you here?
Yeah.
Let's just be like point blank honest. And the idea here is like, we are going to be getting you qualified and interested candidates based on also market conditions, industry insights, what the talent landscape looks like. Let's go out and get you those top four things. And then we can come back and say, do these need to be adjusted? But like, to what you said, workplace, behavioral, performance, compensation, benefits, these are all super important topics that to a hiring manager, they're going to want all of them. To a candidate, they're going to want, at the same time, they're going to want all of their, must-haves, which might be
Yeah.
20 things. And we tell them the same thing. Four. You can get four. It's like also going to the real estate point. You want to go get an incredible house. You can have the nice windows. You can have, the nice location. Guess what? You might have a 1-car garage, not 2 cars. But that's okay because you only have 1 car.
Right. Totally. So once you've collected all this information, you start building a description, you're able to pitch this to candidates and have sort of these conversations. How do you go about engaging this ICP?
Yeah. So I think it starts, assuming obviously we have the job description, we have the outreach messages, we have the pitch, we have everything we need, solidified. I think it starts out with visibility on social media, obviously posting job descriptions. However, something that many companies, I don't see them doing this, a few things. One, a compelling 60-second video or less about the job, about the company, why it's exciting. And, ideally the manager and key stakeholders are posting these videos as well, going out, asking investors, employees, friends, family, colleagues, peers to authentically share and comment about what they are excited about. That's a huge differentiator when I see people sharing a role and saying like, Shannon is amazing, and that's because ABC, and you should get in touch with her, as opposed to just sharing the role.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then, testing different methods of what attracts the best people, agencies, social media, job boards. And last but not least, asking for feedback. and iterating based on that. So both from referral partners and candidates, I want to understand like how they heard about us. I want to understand what they think about the job description, how they feel reading the job description, right? It's not just like, oh yeah, I can do this job. It's like when you ask someone how they feel, it's like customer sentiment. It's like, yeah, this sounds really interesting and I feel good about it because ABC. Or you know what, like this really sounds like there's not going to be great work-life balance. And I honestly, I don't think I would feel great working in this job.
Totally. One thing that came up recently in a conversation I had with a couple of folks at a company called Literati is Lindsay, who's their head of talent there, said, you really need to meet people where they are, like where for the talent pool. So obviously if you're hiring recruiters, LinkedIn, amazing place. Recruiters are all over LinkedIn. Even all my friends who are currently looking, they spend so much time on LinkedIn just looking at content, not even considering the time that they're looking for a job. But if you're looking for software engineers, they're probably not spending as much time on LinkedIn looking for content. They may be on, they may be putting in their repository on GitHub, or they may just be on other parts of the internet that aren't typically places that recruiters live. So I love the premise of really meeting candidates where they are and where they live and hang out, not literally live, but where they live to consume content, because that's the kind of social visibility you need to get the right people applying and inbound to your jobs.
Totally. I guess to that point, and I think it depends company to company, but something that I advise my team is like, if you reach out to a candidate and for whatever reason they're not a good fit at this time, it's asking them if they know someone who could be a good fit, but it's asking them with very specific terms, actually probably including the must-haves, and saying, do you know someone that is looking for has early stage experience in San Francisco, willing to go into the office, and has A and B as well, or C and D as well, right? And that actually helps people be a little bit more clear to make the referral, as opposed to like, do you know anyone else?
Right. Yes. Making a specific ask is the best way to get help. All of us that get messages on LinkedIn, hey, I was just wondering if you could help me. I'm like, with what? Like make it easy for people to help. Make it easy for people to reach out to their network. Make it easy so people know exactly what they're looking for and where to find them and how to find them. Honestly, better yet, find them for them and ask them to reach out. That's a great kind of strategy as well to get people interested. So yeah. Anything else you want to add on these notes before we jump to some questions we'd just like to hear from everyone about?
Yeah, I think just something to note that is really important in the market right now is the stability and finances of the company.
Mm-hmm.
And I've actually spoken to really, really strong software engineers that say, if the job description, if the outreach message doesn't contain this information, it's an automatic red flag, and I'm out. Right. And just because they get so many opportunities, it makes a lot of sense. And on the other side, hiring managers and other stakeholders, they might be like, I don't really want to share this information, and everyone's different here, but I would caution on the side of like, again, people want to know more information. It's a challenging time. It's a weird time. If you're not giving that information up front, guess what? You might be missing out on a lot of great candidates.
Yeah, and I think, again, transparency is key, right? Like, I had worked for an organization who they wouldn't share this with candidates, not even candidates who had signed offers, not even with the company. So we would be like, what's the runway? And they're like, and we're like, okay, like that should be a red flag, right? Like, but I was a little bit too naive and junior to really understand that at the time. But we at Ashby, and one thing I really appreciate about working here is we get like these investor updates as everyone who works at the company is has the potential to be an investor because we have options with our bank, what's in the bank, what's the runway, and that makes you just feel so much more at ease because what's happening And I think candidates deserve that. So if there are companies who aren't doing that, whether it's honestly internal or for candidates, they need to reconsider. Is my
100%.
take there.
100%. And now, I mean, now more than ever, right?
Totally.
There's so many great candidates out there that you potentially have a shot at. However, you could very easily disqualify yourself on what I would call low-hanging fruit here. Don't do
Mhm.
that.
Don't do it. We're telling you, don't. Awesome. Well, would love to hear from you. What does hiring excellence mean to you?
Yeah, I think it's, to overgeneralize, it's identify, attract, engage the best candidates. People who can come into an org, they can listen first, they can make an impact that the organization as a whole can feel, and so that their customers can feel. And I'm a big fan of internal and external NPS surveys. And I think we're going to start to see that more popular as time goes on. So employees and customers want to work with people they like, in addition, who can perform at a high level. And at SingleSprout, we actually do internal NPSs for non-revenue producing functions like our recruiting coordinator team and our people team. And I think it also helps understand blind spots of what the expectations are of other people in the org about them.
Definitely. I love that. Now, to my favorite and final question. What is your recruiting hot take?
I think now more than ever, we need to understand customers and their problems, their needs, who they are, how they feel about using the product or the service. And those needs need to be connected to the recruiting process. So organizations spend a lot of time around customer needs, but not a lot of time about how that impacts their recruiting and who works at their company. Diversity, like who is your customer, right? If your customer is from all different backgrounds and you're not hiring people from all different backgrounds, you got a problem, right? Or different experiences. You want to try to match that, right? And being thoughtful here is super important. So I hope everyone who is in the hiring game takes a more active approach of connecting customer problems with their recruiting process. Now, I know that can be a challenge, and customer problems can be quote unquote abstract depending on, what the product or service is. But that being said, your customers usually are giving you a lot of really good feedback. And a lot of that is about how they want to be talked to, how they want to be serviced, how they want a product to perform. 10 times out of 10, that's the people that are working with them, that are partnering with them. So keep that top of mind. I would, if you take one thing away from this, is I would take your last customer NPS and see how can we integrate this into our recruiting process.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to do that as well, because you're aligning your recruiting process with your business process, which inherently is just going to give your recruiting team a boost and just give your recruiting team more ground to stand on. Like, hey, we're fulfilling the need, like we're truly fulfilling the needs of the business.
100%.
Cool. Well, I think we are coming up on our time. Where should people go to learn more about you and SingleSprout?
www.singlesprout, Sprout, SPROUT.com. And then they can also find us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Natan Fisher, NatanFisher. Thank you so much, Shannon. This was a lot of fun, and I hope it's helpful for, your listeners.
Definitely. We really appreciate you joining us on Offer Accepted and spending time with us today. I'm sure people are going to get a lot of value out of this and really focus on building that top of funnel. So thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Offer Accepted, the podcast for ambitious recruiting professionals, brought to you by Ashby, the all-in-one recruiting platform. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow and share with your TA community. We'll see you next time.